Good morning, everyone. It's good to have you here. Good morning to those of you who are joining us. We can see your names on the screen, but you've all been muted online, and everybody here is going to behave themselves, so they're kind of muted too. We'll see. Glad to have you. So there are more chairs around the tables, and just feel free, and if you want to come up closer, you can do that. As I told the people sitting way in the back, you got to buy your tickets early.
Five right there.
Okay, well this morning we are going to, good morning sir, good to see you there. We're going to start a 3-week session on what I struggled with this. I mean, friends, family, sanity, those three I got. Is it keeping them all, or maintaining them, or making sure you don't let go? Is it keeping each one? That's what you get. That's all I could do. Yesterday I finally decided this slide has to be done. It's done. And so we're about keeping sanity in friends and family. And is it troubled times? Is it fractious times? Is it contentious times? Is it angry times? It's really all of those things, and that's why we're going to talk about it today. So what I want to do this morning is kind of give you an overview of the 3 weeks, what we're going to do, and then a little bit of a preamble. So let me see if I'm working here. I am, and here are the 3 weeks that we're going to cover. We're going to, again this morning, the overview, a short preamble. We're going to talk about what's going on today. I mean, what does the world look like to us today? We're going to talk about the elephant and the rider. You'll understand that a little more later. And we're going to talk about religion and politics. Oh, Lordy, are we in for some trouble? This is not a good thing. So here's where we are going this morning, though, specifically. I'm sorry, now I'm messed up. I got these slides from. These are the 3 titles of the 3 weeks. So the elephant and the rider. Next week we're going to talk about the righteous mind, and then the last one, keeping your friends, family, and sanity, is kind of a so what do we do? So what are the strategies? How do we think, act, speak, converse, relate, etc. With folks that we don't want to agree with. Part of the preamble is talking about this, and the first point is it's hard to talk about what it's hard to talk about. The problem is that we're not talking about the problem, and that's a problem. And this whole thing is circular. And what I've discovered as I've tried to dig into this, both for sermon purposes and for teaching purposes and for relational purposes, is it's hard to find the end of the thread. You reach in and you think you've got the end so you can start to untangle the cords kind of behind your TV or something like that, and you don't. And when you pull on this, it creates a tension, and another one, it knots, and pretty soon you are talking about things that you hadn't started talking about. And you haven't gotten to the place where you really can converse with the person that you want to converse with. It's not easy to do. And the intersection of faith and politics just complicates it more. It makes it harder. And so the result is that we don't talk about it. Or we only talk about one piece of it and only on one view of it. And that's all we talk about, and that's all we listen to, that's all we read about, and we stay in a bubble. And so all of these things create contention. And I got to tell you this, I put in because I want you to know where I am. I teetered. I was putting this class together, I'm going, how many weeks did we say this was going to go? Because I'm not sure I got enough to fill up one day, one session. And then in the next moment, as I'm reading, and I run down a link to a link to a link to a link, I'm going, I don't have enough time. So it's kind of like, I don't know where I am. Just being honest here, I want you to know. Here's another thing that I want to say up front. It's impossible, I think it's inappropriate to be mindlessly neutral. This is the the both and stuff, that there are certainly realities to that, and there are things that we need to think about in that way, but misbehavior is still misbehavior, and sin is still sin, and we can't pretend that things aren't not how they really are, because then we're not being helpful, and we're not, frankly, being sane. So if it's about hanging on to your sanity, then that requires some clarity. I have biases. Guess what? You do too. We all do. They are who we are. And so let me just say a couple of things about my biases, because this is kind of what they do if you're in an interview and say, well, just so you know, I am a Washington Post reporter and Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, so I need to say that. Well, so my biases are kind of weird, because as a pastor, I'm also a former military officer. And that kind of mixes some people's minds up, which is not surprising because it kind of mixes my mind up sometimes. And let me give you an example. So both Judy and my fathers were military. Both of our children served in the military. Of the 10 children of our parents, it's 11. 8 of the 11 served in the military or are married to people who served in the military. Kind of in the blood. So I have a really serious thing about the behavior of people in a democracy and toward a constitution to which I have taken an oath, which I consider deeply meaningful. And so I understand certain acts of people to be, in the secular sense, blasphemy. When the flag is used as a political prop or to beat somebody up. I just find that deeply offensive. I don't wear flags. I don't have flag bumper stickers. I have a neighbor just a couple houses up from me at the top of the hill who flies a flag, and thank God for him, and he's a wonderful man, but he doesn't light it at night, and he leaves it hanging. I'm not going to go knock on his door and tell him that that's inappropriate. You don't leave the flag hanging in the dark. If you're going to leave it hanging, you light it, as my brother in Maryland does, because he was raised by an Army sergeant too, and he knows better. But that gentleman is a wonderful neighbor, and I just really appreciate him, and I don't want to bother him. People do things in church that offend me on the other side, and I had a bishop tell me, a former bishop of mine, he said, you have a high theology of the Eucharist. You have a high Christology, as a former Catholic. And I said, yeah, that's exactly right. I don't think that's a moment in our lives as Christians that we just kind of, give me a little bread and juice, bang, done. But that there is some meaning to the presence of Christ, though transubstantiation in a literal body and blood of Christ is not where I am theologically, but I think that's deeply meaningful, and so that's kind of where my biases lie. So if somebody holds up a Bible as a political prop or hugs a flag, just kind of sends the wrong kind of signal up my spine. I get really upset by that. So those are my biases, and I think both of those worlds are under attack today in strange ways. I mean, we are not helping ourselves as either a society or as a church, as a faith community, as we talk about those things. Okay, the next thing I want to say is, I want to step out of my thing for you folks online. If I get invisible, I'll get visible again in a while. I'm told between these pillars, I'm okay. And if I get outside the pillars, then that's not good. So left, right, stay in the center, Chamberlain. That's what I'm hearing. So because of how many there are of us and how this is more of a lecture and less of a conversation, I've done a little bit of this in my Sunday school class, and they'll hear some things for the second time, but that's okay. I've read them for the second or third or fourth or fifth time because it's worth thinking about. But we did it with conversations around tables. And what we're going to do in lieu of that is instead of having questions at the end, because I think that there's no way to do that in a helpful way. What I'm going to do at the end is give you my email, my Great Plains email, and invite your questions or comments by email to me. And then we'll take the first 15 minutes of the next class, first 10, 15 minutes of the next class to talk about and to answer those that I can sort, and I can combine questions for folks. And that way we can stay engaged with one another. I would also say, if you want to connect offline, that's fine. We can do that in a conversation over coffee upstairs or whenever. But in the class, we'll do it that way. So I'll give you an email. You email me questions. You email me comments. Email me disagreements. That's okay. All right. Whatever it is that you want, or a request for a link. I think one of the things that I'm going to do, we're going to see some videos. I'm going to reference some columns of people, writing of people, books, and I'm going to have a resource list of all those things that I'll hand out at the end so that you can link to a video that you want to see again, or order a book, or read an excerpt from a book, or an article, or a opinion column, or whatever you want to read. All right? So that's where we're going to do that. And the last thing I want to say is, oh my Lord, are there going to be rabbit holes? I am, well, Judy might argue with this that I'm borderline, but I'm borderline what is that? ADHD. And I love a rabbit hole. I love a good rabbit hole. I get stuck on the internet. It's hard for me to put together something like this or to even study for a class, because when I'm up there doing some research and I'm reading that, and there's a link to the guy who gave this guy the idea, and I go back to that guy, and then he started because this guy, and I'm 4 links into and away from what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And that's how much of this class was. So let's get started. What's going on? I want to share this with you. I shared this with my Sunday school class. This man is talking to his son. If you can't see it in the very back, he's talking to his son. Mom's over here on the couch sulking, and the man is saying, "Your mother and I are separating because I want what's best for the country and your mother doesn't." It's good to start with a laugh, because that's the image I used last Sunday, and that's what a lot of this feels like to us. And it's weird how many places it feels like that. I mean, it can feel like that in traffic. It can feel like that as you watch somebody process through the grocery store. It can feel like that at a city council meeting. It can feel like that at your neighborhood meeting, where they're trying to, as we did not a year ago, trying to decide whether they were going to let somebody build a house that would have required a keyhole off the, oh Lordy, it was like the end of the earth. And so, it can get that way. Here's some good news and bad news. The good news is that in the elections of 2018, 2020, and 2022, they saw the highest levels of participation in decades, 50 to 100 years. I mean, the engagement was off the charts. Great. The problem is, and the bad news is, that voters increasingly cite hatred and antipathy toward the other side as their motivation for voting. So if the increase in voting is good news, the reason for the increase is not necessarily the case. I want to read you something here. I hope I am not over-weary, but if I am not, there is even now something of ill omen among us. I mean the increasing disregard for law that pervades the country, the growing disposition to substitute the wild and furious passions in lieu of the sober judgment of courts, and the worse than savage mobs for the executive ministers of justice. This disposition is awfully fearful in any community, and that it now exists in ours, though grating to our feelings to admit, it would be a violation of the truth and an insult to our intelligence to deny. It seeks regions hitherto unexplored. It sees no distinction in adding story to story upon the monuments of fame erected to the memory of others. It denies that it is glory enough to serve under any chief. It scorns to tread in the footsteps of any predecessor, however illustrious. It thirsts and burns for distinction, and if possible, it will have it, whether at the expense, at whatever expense. At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? By what means shall we fortify against it? Shall we expect some transatlantic giant to step the ocean and crush us to a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined with all the treasures of the earth, excluding our own, in their military chest, with the very best commander at their fore, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio River or trod on the Blue Ridge Trail. At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reaches us, it must spring up among us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free persons, we must live through all time or die by suicide. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of freemen, we must live through all time or die by suicide. 1838, Lincoln was 28 years old when he gave that Lyceum speech in 1838. There was a moment when, and this was before the First World War, the London Times put out a question to a number of people and asked, what's wrong with the world? And one of the stories is that G.K. Chesterton answered, I am, which may be apocryphal, but he really did write a letter. And in it, he said this, in one sense, and that the eternal sense, okay, man of faith, the thing is plain. The answer to the question, what is wrong, is or should be, I am wrong. Until a man can give that answer, his idealism is only a hobby. It's only a hobby. It's not who he is or she. I said last week in the sermon that it had come to me, just as I was doing all this stuff, that there's no evil in the world that didn't come from us, that is human beings. And it all comes from a single decision. I mean, each person in this world, each human being, and remember, we always remember they're created in the image and likeness of God, each human being has choices, and the results of those choices are exactly what we see in the world, nothing else. Of course, there's some scripture that kind of puts a stamp on that. In Mark, Jesus says, there is nothing outside a person that by going inside can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. The things that come out in words or in decisions in our everyday lives are what defile us. So the elephant in the rider, you're curious about this perhaps. What is this about? Well, it is a formulation, a metaphor that Jonathan Haidt, an author who was at the time teaching at the University of Virginia, he's a social studies moral formation. He's now at the Stern School at NYU, New York. And out of his book, two books actually, The Happiness Hypothesis and The Righteous Mind, which is kind of the basis for the next class. The Righteous Mind, subtitled, Why Good People Are Divided Over Religion and Politics. That will be on your reading list for a book that you might want to read. It's a fascinating book. Came up with this metaphor, but there are others who have worked in this, and it's the idea that there is an emotional side to us and a rational side to us. Plato called it the unruly horse and the charioteer. And Freud talked about the id and the superego, right? So there's always this understanding that we have an emotional core to us in some sense, and we have a rational side. And those two things interact in some interesting ways. This is, and you won't be able to read any of this, but and the color's not great either. So there's the brainstem here, and there's a red region, and then this outer region. And the brainstem, this reptilian brain, is about 300 million years old, and it's the bodily functions, a respiration, heartbeat, and basic stuff. It has no understanding, will, or anything of its own. It just does what it does. It just works. Kind of Apple early. It just works. And then there's the limbic system, and that's this red part in the middle, and that's a paleo-mammalian brain. And it developed about 200, 250 million years ago, and that brain is the brain that learned that sometimes you need to run as fast as you can to get away from danger. Or you need to, and your body needs to pump out some extra adrenaline to help you do that. It's the place where fight or flight comes from. It's the thing that fulfills our animal needs and emotion, feeding and reproduction and parenting, and all of those things come out of that limbic brain about 250 to 300 million years old. And then, about 150,000 years ago, the neo-mammalian brain, this cortex process, this cortex in a complex process, this is perception, planning, attention, abstract thinking. This is what separates us from our mammalian cousins. Okay, this is the part of the brain that leads us through our daily lives, we think. All right, because the reality is that compared with one another, the limbic brain is an elephant, and an old elephant, 250 to 300 million years old, and the rational part of our brain, the rider, the conscious verbal thinking brain, 150,000 years old, is the rider. If you put that in, to give you a scale there, if that time back to the beginning of the mammalian brain was 24 hours, the rational part's 45 seconds along in that 24 hours, okay? And here's the thing that is pretty well understood, that when we are confronted with something, an argument, a disagreement, somebody pulling out us in traffic, danger, whatever, the elephant immediately reacts. And the elephant can react and does react before you ever rationally think about anything. And it's one of the reasons, interestingly, where you take people who are very thoughtfully engaged with social injustice and with treating people fairly, and you put them in front of a screen and flash images at them, and they can track the heart rate and your physical reaction to the images of people who don't look like you. And we would say, we are not prejudiced. And we would be rationally correct. We don't consciously do anything, and yet, anything that presents itself as other and as potentially dangerous alerts our elephant, and it reacts. Haidt says that he also calls the rider kind of the elephant's press secretary. And this is the person who explains why things went the way they did. And so the rational brain, after something happens, after you react in a certain way, then the rational brain says, well, there must be a good reason for that. Oh, here it is, and explains it. Although it had nothing to do with what the elephant did, right? The elephant's going to go where the elephant's going to go, and if you get in a fight with the elephant, you're not going to win. The interesting piece of that is, now think about what we're moving toward. How do we talk with other people? Well, are you going to talk to their elephant or their rider? Right? Because the moment that you get into an argument, guess who's in control? The elephant's in control. And the elephant is not going to, is not going to give up and is not going to lose the argument. And the writer then starts to explain why the elephant's behaving that way. And so the whole, this is why you read in different places, and I read it, John Tempro gave me a really interesting but very sad piece out of the Kansas Reflector by somebody who'd written, there's no hope for us. We will never agree. And and this person happened to be conservative, and it was so the liberals doing this, the liberals doing that. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't agree with it. Can't compromise. We'll never compromise. We're bound to split. And going, hello, Mr. Elephant. The temptation would be, and I had it, to write to this person and say, no, look, here. And then rationally explain to them why their elephant's out of control. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. So what you do with that is something we'll talk about later. But what's happening with that right now is that's why when you get political emails or political text messages, it's, oh my God, the world's on fire. Because that message wants to connect with your elephant. Because if your elephant says send money, your rational brain will explain why you're going to do that. Okay? That's how that works. So how many people here do YouTube? Okay, good. All right, there are at least a few. About half, maybe, 40%. And so YouTube's my thing of choice, as I said last week, and because TikTok's not long enough. And YouTube, in 2030, you can watch hour-long, very interesting little things on YouTube. I watched one last night about Rickrolling. You know what Rickrolling is? You've been Rickrolled, Rick Ashley, and they're going to give you, I'm not going to do it because that would end up on the web and that would be a bad thing. but Rickrolling is there's this link and you think it's going to be one thing and all of a sudden here's Rick Ashley dancing. And he does it just like this. And it was with Rick Ashley. And it was the most delightful and pleasant thing. Okay, so anyway, YouTube. See, I told you, ADHD rabbit holes. I'm going to go there. The point that I was headed toward, and now we'll get back to, is that if you are a consumer of YouTube and you get on there, you'll find there are suggestions. There'll be something like, and in innocuous subjects, aviation or cooking or anything, and they'll go, oh, and that's the picture that'll be up there, and there'll be some kind of curious and you want to go, well, what's that person looking at? And that's your elephant, because that's what that's appealing to. Or the title of it is, let's take cooking, because that's kind of innocuous. I made this recipe, and I now make it twice a week. No, you don't. You're lying to me. You don't make that twice a week, because that would get awfully boring. I don't care what it is, right? And so that's what hooks you, and that's exactly the thing that hooks you in this hot button social issues. And it grabs us and then invites our rational self to sign on. And that's what we're all living with. And we can't point to other people and say, this is happening to you, and so I'm going to help you get straight, because it's happening to all of us. Okay? It happens in advertising. The computer knows who you are, it knows where you live, it knows what you like. And if you have any doubt about that, you can try an experiment. Go online and just look up a couple of pages on some adult medical condition. Okay? And you will begin to get ads in your Google searches for diapers and walkers and all kinds of different adult things that you're going to need, because you're obviously old, because we know what you're reading, right? And the political world has the same algorithms as those advertisers. They're using those advertisers, okay? And so that is all part of the milieu in which we live and breathe, and it is what it is, okay? Was I going to tell you that story now? One of the things, as an example of the hype And I've got a good example on both sides of this aisle. Last week, was it just last week that Hunter Biden was convicted and will be sentenced. And there had been great hue and cry in the conservative media dome about, oh, the rigged justice system, and it'll get over, and he got convicted. And all of a sudden, that narrative doesn't work as well. And so the new narrative, and this is not some fringe, this on Fox News, the new narrative was, oh, well, this is all a plan. This was all set up in order to show, Hunter Biden's convicted in order to show that, or to pretend that the Justice Department's not rigged or in bed with Joe Biden. That's kind of crazy. The other thing that happened last week that I read about was Justice Alito, who went to a Catholic religious gathering and was surreptitiously recorded, dishonestly, let's say it, not just dishonestly recorded by somebody who was prompting him to say certain things, among which were, there's real division in the country. Well, that's not a subject for argument. I mean, yes. He said that. He said that there are moral dimensions to that. Yes, indeed, there are. That it's, that people don't want to compromise with one another, that one side is going to win in that, but people need to get engaged. And that got presented in liberal media over in the mainstream as, oh my God, can you believe this Supreme Court justice had the temerity to have an opinion about this? And I read that, and I was kind of, I'm not sure I really, and then another column came out, let me say, in the New York Times, oh, it's liberal, in the New York Times, a very thoughtful column came out by a Catholic writer who said, hey, wait a minute, what exactly got said that was the problem? I challenged that view. But in both of those cases, something was overblown or misrepresented intentionally. This is the writer speaking, because the elephant didn't like the results that it saw. Okay? And that's why, that's one of the reasons why if some junior House of Representatives person in Montana says something dumb, and haven't we all of a sudden that gets picked up, broadcast across media, and used as an example for why we're all going to, well, no, not all of us, but those people are going to hell. And hopefully we'll survive them. That's kind of where that goes, okay? So that landscape is a challenge for us. It is a challenge to not stop reading. First of all, it's a challenge to not look at the stuff that, and just to tell you, I automatically block any channel where that happens. And I understand that I may be sacrificing some really interesting video, but I will not tolerate that. I will not tolerate the intention to manipulate my emotions to get whatever that person wants. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it politically, I'm not gonna do it commercially. It just offends me, right? And I don't get them anymore. It's the weirdest thing. I mean, they just don't appear. You can control these things. You can control these things. But that's why everybody wants to hype us all the time. And I'm just checking my time. All right. Are you ready to go there? Oh my goodness. I have a friend in Colorado, a couple who are friends of ours, and we haven't seen them some time. But Cheryl, the wife, had a rule that she made very clear. There would be no conversation about politics in her home, period. I think that even extended to religion, but it was kind of we're not going there. Now, I don't know whether there were lost friendships previously or in the neighborhood, but of course what that what that transmits to me now as I think about that in this context is, we don't talk about that because we are unable to control our elements. They are untrained, unruly, unpredictable, unhealthy, unhelpful, unholy. We're just not going there. And that's part of the problem. That's the problem of not talking about the problem, which is the problem, right? Let's talk about what those two things really are. And I'm sorry, I'm not very good yet at, I could do 2 columns, but they turned into bullet columns, but really those are headings, politics and religion. I'll try to do better. I'm just getting started this rookie. So in politics, in public life and in civic life, we are guided by laws, by rules, by policy. It's also true that we're also guided by custom, right? I mean, there are customs that we follow here in this part of the country that are not followed everywhere else. There are customs down in the deep south. I'm into Southern living recipes at the moment, so I get a lot of Southern living email. And hey, my media life is very interesting and rich. So, but there's a lot of customs down there that aren't part of us, right? They're just not who we are. So all of those things guide us in our lives. And over in religion, it's really morality and righteousness, really, that guides us. And we're looking for what that eternal truth is and how we are called to live into it and how we are called to share with others the blessings of faith. Now, over on the politics side, over in the civic world, those rules, those laws, and even that policy, that's enforced. And coercive isn't meant to be a negative here. Coercion is when you force somebody to do something. So a speed limit is a coercive direction, right? You are coercively told to drive at 55 miles an hour and punished if you don't, okay, supposedly. And so that's the coercion. Over on the moral side, it's about suasion. It's about moral suasion. It's about sharing truth and leading people to understand. But there is no temporal. Some would say there's eternal, but we're not going. There's a rabbit hole. We're not going there. But there's no enforcement. At least in faith as we practice it. Now we'll get into some other thoughts about that in a moment, but there's no enforcement of that. This is a matter of personal preference and personal engagement. And if we want to enforce that in the secular world, we go to court or we go to an arbitrator or we do something formal and legal and binding. But faith in the end is none of those things. It's a matter of conscience. And here's one where I think the Catholics have a step on things, and I haven't really thought deeply about why that's the case, that it's not picked up in ours, and it may flow out of the Catholic understanding of mortal sins and venial sins and that whole thing, and how purgatory works, and et cetera, all that stuff. But there's an understanding that conscience is what matters, and that a well-informed and engaged disciple will have a conscience that will lead them in an appropriate direction. It will lead them to appropriate thought, appropriate words, appropriate action. Now, in some sense, over on the Protestant side, the Baptists are famous for believing, in some sense, the same thing, in that the Baptists, in their purest believe that individuals, through the power of the Holy Spirit, individuals have what they call soul competency, S-O-U-L, soul competency. That each person is empowered by the Holy Spirit to be competent in their decisions regarding matters of faith and morals. That had some interesting, That's a great rabbit hole. I'd like to go there, but that gets tricky. That gets tricky if you want everybody to think the same way, doesn't it? I mean, in the Catholic world, dogma. You got to believe that. You're not Catholic. Mary ascended into heaven. Mary was born without sin. Dogmatic statements. The Pope is infallible when he speaks ex cathedra from the chair of Peter. Dogma. Baptists don't believe in dogma. And yet, if you were to go to a Baptist church and say, you know, I really believe that marriage might be a sacrament. No, you can't believe that. I mean, you're not getting thrown out of the church for that. You get thrown out of church maybe for believing your pastor could be a female. That person can be exited. So it gets kind of tricky. It gets kind of tricky. So where does all this play up, and how interesting is this? I think the best example, and here's where I want to go, and I'm just going to put this up on the screen to get off that one. I read a book in when I was doing some doctoral studies called "Before the Shooting Begins." A guy at the University of Virginia, still there, still writing interesting books, and he wrote this book, "Before the Shooting Begins," as a way of talking about the divide that was occurring in the country. And he wrote this in the early 90s, okay? And he used as the framework for talking about the problem, the topic of abortion. And he used it because when you look at people's real views about abortion, there are you could draw a bell curve. About 70% of people have a nuanced view of that issue, okay? And then over it gets a little more tricky than out at the edges, and at the very extremes of those two are, on one side you've got fetal personhood. The moment an egg is conceived, there is a person present and no action shall be taken, period. And at the other end you've got this, I'm not sure where the other end is. It gets kind of weird out there. I mean, could you abort a child the day before it was to be born? Really? I don't think it's that far, but it's out there. And 90% of all of the money and the verbiage that is being spent on that issue, guess where that's coming from? It's coming from those two ends. That's exactly right. And it's over the top of all of us. But here's the problem. You've got to pick a side. See, you are told that you've got to pick a side. You're either pro-life or pro-choice. I saw a bumper sticker yesterday in the Hy-Vee parking lot that really kind of struck me as very interesting. It was the bumper sticker, and you may have seen it, says, "Choose life." Wow, that's really interesting. Is that, which side of the spectrum is that on? You could read that either way, couldn't you? I mean, you have a choice, choose this way. See, now, here's the thing about that bumper sticker that I find really delightful. I think that's a moral statement, not a legal statement. Because you see, the issue with abortion, and the reason we have this big fight about it is because that is, we are at that intersection of religion and faith, and it has been crossed over in some very unhelpful ways. And now I'm using this now as a metaphor, so I don't want to get focused in on an abortion debate, but really as a metaphor for how this gets twisted up. The matter of life and when it begins, when it ends, and its nature and worth, all of that is a moral reality. And the Catholic Church, of course, not only abortion but contraception is an issue with them. And the reason for that is not, they're not talking specifically about IUDs, which are, they would consider now but they're talking about any form of birth control that's not natural, which means don't have sex, right? And any, what the objection is that interrupts and interferes with the agency of God on the earth. That God created us male and female, that God created us to procreate, that God intended us to do that, that God created in us appetites and all of those things in order that we might procreate and be as numerous as the stars in the heavens and conquer the earth, right? And be stewards of the earth. And that anything that interrupts that or that imposes itself in upon that is wrong, is morally wrong. And so that's where that comes from. And initially, I mean, for some time, Catholics would have understood early terminations of pregnancies, let me say that. An early termination of pregnancy as more an objection from that standpoint than from, oh, that's some kind of murder or homicide, okay? What happened is that argument became political, and it became political out of the religious world, okay? So the religious world wanted to make a moral argument that it's wrong to abort a fetus, and just that really does impinge, it does interrupt. I mean, there's something holy going on there, and we ought not be interfering with that. And there were people who felt so strongly about that, they wanted to pass a law to make sure that didn't happen. The problem is, of course, that the law that they want, the view that they have, is not necessarily the view that other people have. And so they want that coercive, remember, coercive. Now, their conscience tells them, they've been morally persuaded that this is wrong, their conscience confirms that for them. They now want to make that a legal requirement, a coercive legal requirement that is subject to the courts. You see how those two got crossed? They're crossed right there. And so now the question is, how do you do that? And of course, you all know the history, the recent history of that. What's happened, interestingly, is kind of the edge of one side of that abortion debate kind of triumphed in the court. And I think it's largely the 70% in the middle who said, oh, time out, wait a minute. No, the absolutes are not where we are. That's really the answer, right? Absolutes are not the answer. And so we've got this big fight going on, and interestingly, I think all the politicians now want to get out of that, don't they? They want shut of that. That has become a really, really difficult place to be. And at some point I'd say, well, yeah, tough luck. You made that bed. You lie in it. I mean, it has been used for political purposes for a very long time. And scare tactics. So pick your issue, and one party or the other will use that issue as a scare tactic. Social Security. Gonna come get you, Social Security. You know that, right? They are coming for you, Social Security, just saying. We're probably old enough not to have to worry about that. Sorry, just kidding. But there's always, they're coming after you, they're coming after you, they're coming after you. It's the enemy. And the enemy, your elephant knows what to do about enemies. Your elephant's going to fight. That's what your elephant's going to do. We are we're in a spot, I think, both as a church and big C church, not little C church, not First United Methodist Church, not United Methodist Church, not even Christian Church. Okay, we're in a spot as people of faith, trying to figure out how it is that we live in this contentious political world, because the real contention is political, and religion's getting used and moral issues, which are faith issues, which are conscience issues, are being used in many different ways. And that's pretty much, and I'm not meaning to be inappropriately neutral, but everybody knows about the elements, and everybody's using them, right? And our job is to first be aware of that. That's the first step, to know that we are subject to manipulation. My favorite story about manipulation, by the way, has to do with hamburgers. I know, but you gotta start low and go up. So, I think when you get a certain age, you have too many memories, and that's why you start to sound old. Oh, you kids don't understand. We had some carpet laid, and this guy found a little pin. It was it had for holding a thumb, a little bitty pin, and he said, "Sir, I don't know what this is, but when we picked up the carpet, this was in the carpet. You need to have that." And I said, "Oh, son, your phone doesn't have a physical SIM in it, does it?" It was a little pin you used to get the SIM card out of your phone when you change phones, right? And they're all electronic now, and so it's like, he didn't have a clue. Hamburgers, radical hamburgers. Back in the day, if you went to McDonald's and you ordered a hamburger or quarter pounder, they give you that. That's what you get. And one day, it became, not just once, but every single time that you ordered a hamburger, a quarter pounder, the person would say, "Do you want cheese with that?" 10 cents, they add 10 cents to your hamburger charge, 10 cents. "Do you want cheese with that? Do you want cheese with that?" And you get to the point where I scream, "You know, if I want a cheeseburger, I'd ask for a cheeseburger. I want a hamburger. Stop. Do you want cheese with that? Do you want cheese with that?" And they got computers. They know when it's time that every one of the quarter pounders now gets cheese. And the price went up 10 cents. And if you want a quarter pounder, a hamburger, you have to remember to ask them not to put cheese on it. And they don't give you your dime back. They're not giving you that dime. You are just, dude, you want cheese with that? You're gonna get cheese with that. And now I notice Wendy's is doing the same thing. So, that's my example. Get off my lawn, the world's going to hell. Cheese on your hamburgers, there you go. You can't order cheeseburger. Well, I've got just a couple of minutes, and I said we would do this, and first flush questions aren't always the best questions, because what I really like you to do, and this is about a conversation, is to have conversation as you go away. Have conversation with your spouse, your friends, and to be thinking about this stuff, and to think about the questions, and then fire those questions back after a couple of days. Yeah, you said this, but what about? Okay, or whatever. Or you talk too much about this, don't do that anymore. You're welcome to say that. My elephant might not agree. Just say. Anything, anybody got a thought they want to share, just as we get ready? Max.
This is just a general question. And again, I'm going to ask for my wife. She couldn't be here today. Is this going to be recorded so that she can then?
I believe we did record. That was the intention, and as we were worried about getting camera stuff and everything,
Good.
I don't know that we did. I'm hoping that we did. I can't tell if we did.
How am I going to duplicate when I tell
Do your best, Max. I think I'm hopeful that we did.
All right, thank you.
I'll double check. And certainly if we didn't get it done this time, we'll get it done next time for sure. Okay, so next time, anybody else? Yes, Mary.
Can you share your email address?
I will, yes, it's the next slide, actually. That's me, mchamberlain@greatplainsumc.org.
And you really use that?
Yeah. Why? I really use that?
I love your nuts.
Well, see, so I used to beat up on my pastors in the district. do not use your personal email for your church work. That needs to be a separate email so that when you leave, and you have a professional inbox and a personal inbox. And that's what I have. And so when I turn on my email thing, it shows me all my emails, but I can select, they all show up in one thing, whatever address they're to, either one of those two that I use. Actually, I have 3, but I won't tell you. The one that I give to, if you want to buy this, give us your email. Yeah, sure, here you go. All right, anything else? Okay, email me, let me know, questions, comments, whatever. I will have, I don't want to do it next week, but I'll do it the week after, and give you a kind of a reading list or a reference list for the things that I'm referencing. I got to tell you that a lot of this, the Elephant and the Rider, I mentioned Jonathan Haidt, that comes out of his book, The Righteous Mind, also the Happiness Hypothesis, but The Righteous Mind is where he really developed it. Next week, I'm hopeful, and I say this to our folks who are watching on Zoom too, I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to include a video that I want you to see of him talking. My Sunday school class has seen this. If we can't work that out, what I will do is have a link to that you can watch that video ahead of time. For those of you who are, certainly those who are on live stream or on Zoom, you'll want to look at it ahead of time if we're not able to project it on screen. And even then, I'm kind of concerned about the sound. I'll be in this week to make sure that we've got real sound and how that all works. And if we're recording, I consider myself a little bit of a tech person, but not that much. David's really. Okay. All right. Well, friends, let's close with a prayer, would you? Lord, thank you so much for the ability to gather and to talk about real things, to be able to listen, to be able to think about difficult topics, to be able to acknowledge and own that we are all people of emotion, and that we do have biases, and we have ways that we see the world, but it's kind of guaranteed that we don't see all of the world. And that people with whom we disagree know some things that we really need to know. So encourage us to conversation, encourage us to relationship, and bless us as we attempt to be in those things. In Christ's name, amen. Thanks a lot, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you.